I'd like to call upon the next speaker, advisor to Asahi Shimbun, Mr. Jinichi Matsumoto, who is well versed with Africa in particular, who will be speaking on development in Africa and global relationship. Mr. Matsumoto, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. My name is Matsumoto. I worked in Asahi newspaper and director of African division and general director of Africa and Middle East were the areas where I covered. For a little over 8 years, I lived in Africa and Middle East. And since then, I have come back to Africa several times on various occasions. And then I left the Asahi newspaper company. But today, as a kind of a special advisor, I began to work with Asahi newspaper, and I'm now working as a kind of a supervisor for a special series on the nuclear power plant accident in Fukushima. Entitled "A Trap of Prometheus." Today, I'd like to make some intervention concerning Africa based upon my experience. Very interesting developments are now underway in Africa. It's not really global as a phenomenon, but at least beyond national borders, various African countries are developing a very lively and interesting positive relationship with each other. And to illustrate my point, I'd like to take an example of Mozambique. I think we have such a handout at your hand with a map of Mozambique. Well, Mozambique was somewhat late in achieving independence among African countries, and it became independent by Portugal in 1975. The UK or France were big colonial ruler giants, but unlike those countries, Portugal is a small country in Europe, and Mozambique became a colony of Portugal. And President Marshall, the first president after the independence of Mozambique, said as follows: in comparison to Senegal or Kenya, they were colonized by France and the UK. In a sense, they were eaten by lions, and they were killed by those lions. But Mozambique was killed by hyena, Portugal. And so both, all of those countries were killed by other animals, but they said in a press conference that Mozambique was somewhat suffered a kind of misery because they were eaten up by hyena, which was less powerful in comparison to big ones like lions. Anyhow, in 1932, I went to Mozambique for the first time. Well, after the independence, it became a socialist country. And when I arrived in the airport, there was a 5-hour delay in the arrival of my plane. And then there were no bus transportations from the airport. There were no regular bus services connecting the airport and the city, and no taxi services either. It's not that the airport was not served by taxis. There was no taxi or no bus transportation at all in the whole country of Mozambique. And so without any booking, I arrived at the airport, and then I had no methods of transportation to go to a city. It was truly a sad experience for me. It just happened that I was lucky. A man of a Japanese trading firm who was already there came to the airport to pick me up. My flight was delayed by 5 hours, but he was there to meet me and pick me up to get me to a city. In a city, there was a hotel run by the government, Polana. It was a very old hotel constructed in the era of Portugal rule. There was a lift, but I was recommended against using it because it may stop on the way between two floors. There was no foreign currency reserve to import food from other countries. Throughout the day, I was served with a grilled frozen meat for 3 meals per day, and there were no shops opened in the street. So breakfast, lunch, and dinner, I had to survive by eating that extremely tasteless grilled frozen meat. And as I mentioned, no shop opened in the street. There was a market. It was a socialist market. There they sold only vegetables. It was a seaport, and just in front there was a good fishing port. And Mozambique was famous for shrimp. And please look at the map. You can find South Africa down at the bottom of the map, and to the right, right across Madagascar, the island, Mozambique is situated in African continent, and off the coast of Mozambican coast, there is a very good fishing ground for shrimps. So that's one kind of seafood Mozambique has been well known for. But there was a very interesting policy by the government. About 3,000 yen per kilogram of shrimps. For mackerel, about 500 yen per kilogram. And of course, there was a big demand for shrimps, and the prices of shrimps went up. But after the socialist government was erected, the government began to say that there shouldn't be any such discrimination between different kinds of food. So the prices of shrimp and mackerel were more or less equalized according to the government regulated prices. So be it a very fresh shrimp, be it a half-rotten mackerel, the price per unit of weight was the same. And it was a state-owned market, and there was a very big refrigerator. When there is a catch of fish, they placed all of the seafoods within a very big refrigerator, and then they try to secure a stable supply of seafood anytime in a year. But refrigerator stopped operating for about 8 hours per day due to a power outage. That means the fresh shrimps became rotten soon, and so in the market there were only seafood which were rotten, and nobody wanted to buy it. And after all, as there was no demand from the consumers, the market began to stop selling fresh seafood. As a result, only vegetables were available in the market. And actually, there were 5 kilometers to commute from the hotel, and the road was quite our slope, and only transportation method I could use was to walk. So I was really doubtful about the future of this country after the independence. But I recently visited Mozambique, and it was a very big change. And there were already 7 hotels of 3-star class, and there was also a very big shopping mall, much bigger than the Nishiki shopping street in Kyoto. And there were 2 big supermarkets supermarket stores in the shopping mall, and there were coffee shops and restaurants in the shopping mall, which were really crowded with young people. There was a big bustle and hustle in the shopping mall, and also shopping mall was served by public transportation like buses, and there were grilled corns and also grilled barbecue type of food. And the consumers were enjoying buying and eating them, and all of the people looked really cheerful, and they seemed to be enjoying their life. And so, in the early 1980s, 7 or 8 years after the independence of the country, there was really nothing in society, but there was such a big change for the better. Why Mozambique became such an active and lively country? There were two major contributors to such success, and this is shown in point 3 of my handout. One big contributor is a direct investment coming from the South Africa, their neighboring country. South Africa indeed has a very big economic strength. The economic size of South Africa in terms of GDP is about 50% of the whole African GDP. And so South Africa, in a sense, has about half the economic power of the whole of Africa. However, this country continued apartheid, racial discrimination, and during that time they suffered economic sanctions. As a result, all the wealth was contained within South Africa during the days of apartheid. And one more point about Mozambique. As I mentioned, Mozambique used to take socialist policies. Therefore, even South Africa had abolished apartheid many years before. Mozambique didn't have any capital inflow from South Africa, but in 1991, apartheid was abolished by South Africa. And in 1994, Mr. Mandela was inaugurated as the first black president of the country. It led to the lifting of all economic sanctions on South Africa. And also in 1991, Mozambique formally departed from the socialist regime, allowing the demonstration of market principles. As a result, an enormous economic power of South Africa began to enter as a flow of capital into Mozambique. Before that, such a movement of capital beyond national borders in Africa was not so freely done. But after in 1990 or 1991, there emerged a very big dynamic movement of capital beyond national borders in Africa. For instance, a company called Mozal, M-O-Z-A-L, was formed. This is aluminum smeltering company in 1998. This is a joint venture among South African Development Corporation and British firm BHP and Japanese trading firm Mitsubishi Corporation. And as you know, aluminum requires enormous amounts of energy for smelting a process. Under the current shortage of power in Japan, we would suffer a dire power shortage if an enormous amount of power had to be used for smelting. And First, Mozambique imports bauxite from Australia, and in South Africa, alongside a Zambezi River, there is an enormous hydraulic power plant, and that generation capacity was enormous, and much of them had been wasted in the past. And stakeholders such as the British BP and Japanese trading firm Mitsubishi Corporation and South African Development Corporation decided to use part of the hydraulic power generation capacity of that enormous dam for aluminum smelting, and the rest of the equity was invested from the South African government. And employees is about 1,200, and there are transportation drivers and also security staff were hired, and they even constructed a school within the precincts of a company, and they even constructed a kindergarten. And all of those facilities included this company, Mozal, provides 3,000 jobs.
And in case in Japan, one worker would have 4 dependents, but in case of Mozambique, one worker had 8 dependents to take care of, and therefore, if there were 3,000 people employed, 24,000 people depended on that single company, Mozal, to be paid salaries for consumption and for buying things. And at the same time, South Africa saw that on their eastern side, the land facing the Indian Ocean was fit for resort development, and therefore such companies came from South Africa to build hotels and shopping malls, and of course these are the kind of industries requiring a lot of manpower, thus leading to greater employment. And therefore, from 1990s onwards, in about less than 20 years or so, the South African capital came into Mozambique, leading to a large number of employment in the order of 5,000 to 6,000. And of course, the employment leads to greater spending of money, which would develop the economy. And therefore, there was a very interesting cycle building due to the capital inflow from South Africa. And also, you would note the per capita income in Mozambique. According to the survey of the World Bank, in 1990, on a per capita basis, it was $170 per year. Whereas in 2011, 2 years ago, this became $470 per capita, which means that there was close to 3-fold increase in terms of per capita income. As for export, the export revenue was only $200 million or so in 1990, based on shrimps and agricultural products, whereas in 2011 this became $5.7 billion, close to 30-fold increase. And therefore, the country South Africa and Mozambique, the two countries' barriers lying between them was very much reduced, leading to greater mobility between these two countries. And in Mozambique, people used to question whether there was any economic activity at all. And yet, with the involvement of South Africa, economy started to develop. And of course, a very simple stove or fire to cook, an utensil. You would grill corn with that simple utensil, and you may be able to earn some money by selling such grilled corn. And the other person who has become able to earn money to earn the living. And rather than grilling corn, someone would think about grilling shrimps instead to make more money, and it will be more attractive because it would smell very nice, and therefore it would attract more customers. And so there were small-scale individual people running business with very simple utensils. And I think that is the kind of interesting development being seen in Mozambique today. Of course, from the global standpoint, this is nothing of the kind of global economy that we are seeing. But at least we are seeing cross-border economic activities leading to developments that are quite interesting in nature. And as I said, South Africa has an economic might on the African continent, and therefore, being led by South Africa, others might follow. If you look at the map, there is a country called Tanzania above Mozambique, and South African capital is also flowing into Tanzania as well. And of course, thinking about the intention of the business community of South Africa as a country, I think, of course, they want to increase their influence in southern Africa, but also I think they want to increase their influence in eastern Africa, like Kenya and Tanzania. And I think as a hub for doing so, they have chosen Tanzania to spread their influence in eastern parts of Africa. The South African capital in Tanzania are quite large. There is a supermarket called ShopRite, which is the biggest supermarket chain in South Africa, and also the cell phone company Vodacom, and a beer brand, SAB, South African Breweries, the largest beer company in South Africa, and Safari Lodge, tourism development. In Serengeti and Ngorongoro, the famous safari parks in Tanzania. In the national park, there were lodges being built, and state-owned tourism authority was running those lodges, and the service was poor. The light bulbs were not functioning. There was no plug in the bathtub, and when you use a shower, the nozzle will drop on you, and therefore the service of the lodges were very poor indeed, because they were run by state-owned companies. But it was quite cheap to stay at the lodge, like 6,000 yen per night, which was quite an amount in local currency. But they don't go on a safari tour usually. Most of the safari tourists are foreigners, and therefore they would be willing to pay that amount to stay at the lodge. But the South African lodges were built with higher quality. And the idea is to rip the Westerners of their money by providing high-quality lodges and get as much money from them as they can, like 40,000 yen per night. So when you stay in a hotel like that, you of course cannot give excuses for the light bulbs are not working, etc. And the employees would be well paid as well, so that they can take good care of the customers and travelers. They would be trained and educated. So in Tanzania, the South African capital has flown in to develop the country as well. In case of Tanzania, compared with Mozambique, the impact on labor and employment was larger. For instance, according to the survey by Jetro IDE, the employment created in Tanzania by use of South African capital was 15,000, and therefore it was a large impact indeed. And of course, what South Africa is doing in Africa is not only creating jobs, not exploitation, but rather the biggest problem of labor in Africa is related to coming late to work and absenteeism. And the African people did not have such work discipline as such, or work ethics that we know of. The sort of work ethics that we would usually expect of workers are not shared by the Africans. So if it's a fine day, they may want to skip work. If they were talking over the phone just before they were to leave for work, they may come late. And so coming late to work and absenteeism were the biggest problems in Africa. And of course, South African companies were well aware of these problems, and therefore they tried to train and educate people so that nothing of the kind would happen. And as for the employers, most of the state-owned companies usually did not pay salaries or were late in paying salaries. Even in countries like Kenya, the problem was the same. And not only was this seen in third-rate companies, but even in schools, the teachers were not paid their salaries or paid late. And in case of South African capital or South African companies, they were punctual in paying once every month. And if they decided that they would pay the workers on the 25th of the month, they would do so, and therefore they were reliable. And if they were reliable in that way, people wanted to work with South African companies. And when they come with that sort of a motivation, they would be educated in trade, and they would be asked not to come late for work or be absent from work if they wanted to be paid. And therefore, in this way, in countries where South African capital flowed in, there was a good cycle of work ethics developed. And of course, even in South Africa, there may be poor quality companies as well. But as far as I know of, I think their way of carrying out business and their way of treating the workers seems to be working well. And after the end of apartheid, it's a little more than 20 years now, and I think this is quite an interesting change taking place in African countries. I talked about examples in Mozambique and Tanzania, but I could also talk about a country called Botswana. which is rich in diamonds. And Devias, the famous diamond company in South Africa, used to conduct diamond auctions in Antwerp, Belgium. But Devias started to change the policy, saying that it would conduct auctions of diamond in Botswana. And until then, the diamond polishing workers or diamond quality certifying people had been trained in Botswana by South Africa, so that the market for diamonds could be opened. Botswana only has a population just small, about 2 million, and yet the diamonds auction market was moved to Botswana from Antwerp, and many traders would come, and skilled workers would be developed. They would also come to the Botswana to work for the diamonds industry. And since I only had 30 minutes, I was not able to speak about exceptions. So I would leave that story for today. But sort of a wall that was there, called by the name of apartheid, fell, and as a result of this fall and abolishing of apartheid, new interesting developments have started to take place in Africa. So globalization is quite an interesting development indeed. So let me stop there. Thank you very much for your attention.